to the outbreak of the First World War.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, first I need to find my glasses. I had trouble yesterday. Yeah. Okay, now I found it. So, before I proceed to the part of my lecture indicated in the title, it is important to briefly review how the Austrian-Hungarian monarchy, and in particular Hungary, developed its relationship with the Balkans from the 1860s onwards. The interests of Hungarian political and economic circles in the Balkans were revived after almost 3 centuries following the Austro-Hungarian Compromise in 1867, when Hungary re-emerged as an almost independent political and economic actor. In 1867, with the Habsburg Empire adopting a dualist structure, the Hungarian political elite found itself in a position to have a say in the foreign affairs of the new state. The monarchy's main political objective was to maintain or even increase its influence as a great power, which was in line with the Hungarian plans. Hungary's Balkan policy was essentially determined by 3 factors. First, the economic interests. It is important to note that in this respect, there was a strong rivalry between the 2 halves of the monarchy, despite the fact that they were constituent parts of the same empire, and we have some details from my colleague's presentation. Second, the preservation of Hungarian supremacy in the Carpathian Basin. In other words, the question of ethnic minorities, which concerned the issues of Serbs, Romanians, Croats, and Bosniaks, indeed the Balkan territories neighboring the country. And last but not the least, the security of Kingdom of Hungary. In fact, the dominant attitude of the Hungarian political elite towards Serbia and the Balkans was Russophobia that had long been present in Hungarian historical thinking. Namely, that the Balkan states, with the help of Russia, could threaten not only the monarchy's position in the Balkans, but also the territorial integrity of the empire. And this was particularly relevant with regard to Serbia. Gyula Andrássy, as a Hungarian prime minister, summarized Hungary's policy towards Serbia after the assassination of Serbian Prince Mihailo Obrenović, a key element of which was to maintain the balance of nationalities in Hungary and thereby ensure the maintenance of the empire. The Serbian elements from inside and outside the Danube constantly interact, and the only way to counteract Serbia's influence on the Serbs at home is for us to assert our own influence in Serbia. In the early 1880s, after the Congress of Berlin, reconciliation with the Balkan states led the monarchy's policy towards the Balkans. This is evidenced by the 1881 treaty with Serbia, which was intended to bring Serbia further away from Russia and closer to the monarchy. In fact, it was a clear consequence of Russia's exclusion from the Balkans after the Congress. The Balkan policy of the following years was characterized by the so-called direct Balkan containment, which aimed to prevent the Slavic states in the Balkans from being linked to Russia. This was to be achieved through the conclusion of treaties of alliance with the Balkan states and their active participation in their economic life, indeed through the combined use of political and economic instruments. From the mid-1890s onwards, however, it became increasingly clear that this policy was not successful, and Serbia pursued an increasingly pro-Russian policy. Partly as a result of this realization, a customs war, so-called Big War, broke out between the monarchy and Serbia in 1906. Simultaneously, the monarchy's foreign policy leadership resumed its policy of negotiating with Russia, with the Russians. However, the anticipated Hungarian reaction, the Hungarian parliament's vigorous protest, did not happen. By the end of the century, Hungarian politicians had adopted a more indifferent and disinterested position in foreign policy, a fact that was also felt by the contemporaries. Until the outbreak of the World War, politics in Hungary was conducted as we lived on an island in the Pacific Ocean, and few people looked beyond Vienna. We can read in the memoirs of Kuno Klebersberg, the legendary Ministry of Education in the interwar period. The indifference can only partly be explained by the fact that the public law conflicts between the 2 halves of the empire were becoming more acute, which distracted the attention of the Hungarian political life from foreign political issues. The fact that following the turbulent period of the 1860s, 1870s, a relative calm had set in the Balkan region probably played a greater role in the Hungarian parliament's aloofness of foreign policy issues. The relative calm was disrupted by the annexation crisis of 1908, which directly impacted Hungarian political interest and understandably drew widespread attention, one might say, from the entire country. Hungary's position regarding events in the Balkans and Serbia, as well as the interest of the monarchy and Hungary within it, was summarized by István Tisza, a former and soon-to-be prime minister, in 1909. According to him, the monarchy's policy could not deviate from the past tense, namely to protect and promote the peaceful, free, and independent development of the peoples of the Balkans, while adhering to the principle of the Balkans for the Balkan peoples. This included opposing any attempts by large, aggressive, and expansionist powers to dominate the region. The essence of this somewhat hypocritical stance was that the interest of the monarchy and Hungary required keeping all other powers, primarily Russia, out of the area. The Hungarian public interpreted Serbia's reactions to the annexation not merely as a violation of good neighborly relations, but as an affront to the general principle of the decent neighborly conduct. This provided a justification for the monarchy to take decisive action against Serbia, framed as a defensive measure against aggression. The Hungarian political elite, and by extension public opinion, categorically rejected Serbia's claim to have any legal right to intervene in the question of annexation or to grant or withhold consent. Consequently, they viewed all matters arising from the relations between the two countries over the annexation as purely bilateral issues between the monarchy and Serbia, into which no other European power should intrude. What is particularly interesting, at least to me, is the reasoning frequently used in debates about Serbia, which at least in words appear to be somewhat lenient towards Serbia's behavior. The crux of this argument was that the monarchy could afford to exercise greater patience with the weaker, much smaller neighbor than with an equal or similarly powerful state. In other words, tolerating Serbia's actions to that point would have been considered cowardice had they came from the neighboring great power. However, the luxury of lenience was permissible towards Serbia as long as Hungarian and imperial interests were not harmed. It is worth noting that this line of reasoning remained a frequent theme in the speeches of Hungarian politicians up until the outbreak of the First World War, and even later, even afterwards, even in the interwar period. One thing, however, was deemed unacceptable under any circumstances: allowing anyone, least of all Serbia, to believe that their tolerance and lenience stemmed from weakness, fear, or cowardice, rather than strength. It is worth briefly mentioning how Serbia was viewed in Hungary at the turn of the century. In short, it was considered as an ambitious yet weak, underdeveloped and primitive country. This disdain is well illustrated by the newspaper article that, commenting on the snow situation in Budapest, noted that the city's spending on snow removal that winter was equivalent to what Serbia could use to finance a small military campaign. There was broad agreement that the development of relations with Serbia would depend entirely on Serbia's conduct. Hungary's policy towards Serbia was succinctly summarized in the lead article of the moderate conservative Pesti Hillap on the 26th of February 1909. What happened? It is already here. I haven't realized. Okay, 1909, reflecting the outcomes of recent debates in the Hungarian parliament. According to the article, Hungary did not want war, but it didn't fear it either. This is the only correct, honorable, and courageous stance that aligns with the self-respect of the Hungarian nation. If war breaks out, the clumsiness of the monarchy's diplomacy must be remedied by our swords. The war that is about to break out will be our war. We must defeat the Slavs in Serbia or elsewhere on the Balkan Peninsula to ensure peace with their ethnic kin living within our own country. The situation now differs from the previous wars, during which the general Hungarian sentiment was that it was no bad thing if the monarchy suffered a significant defeat in the battle. Historical experience demonstrated that whenever the monarchy lost a war, the Hungarian nation always gained constitutional achievements. It refers to the wars, the Italian and the German unification wars. Now, however, the situation was different because this entire conflict directly concerned us, Hungarians. If war breaks out, it will not be waged for away in the distant west, far from our borders, but right next to the Hungarian border. And it could even spill over into the internal territory of Hungary. Furthermore, the war will erupt against a nation whose linguistic kin also reside within our country's borders. In Parliament, there was a consensus that the monarchy had reached its limit of tolerance regarding Serbia's provocations, and that if necessary, the defense of Hungarian honor, dignity and territorial integrity justifies supporting the most vigorous measures in the war against Serbia. Only left-wing representatives, primarily Social Democrats, dissented, maintaining that a great power like Austria-Hungary can dismiss the meddling of a tiny state like Serbia with contempt in the name of national honor. Alongside the widespread saber-rattling, there was also a seemingly more peaceful issue that continued to interest Hungarian political circles even after the annexation crisis, even after the annexation crisis subsided. Economic relations and the trade agreement regulating them. As mentioned earlier, a customs war had been raging between the two states since 1906, with the monarchy seeking to economically subdue Serbia. It seemed to have all the tools at its disposal to achieve this, as the economic relationship between Habsburg monarchy and Serbia had been highly intense. By 1905, 90% of Serbian exports went to the monarchy, and 60% of its imports also came from Austria-Hungary. So therefore, monarchy was unquestionably Serbia's most important foreign trade partner. Without delving into the details of the customs war, it can be summarized that it caused significant harm to both parties. The damage was so severe that negotiations to resolve the trade dispute began in 1907 and were successfully by March 1908 finished and resulted in agreements between the two countries. However, the Hungarian government only submitted the legislation for ratification in November 1908, and debates over it dragged on for months, coinciding with the deepening annexation crisis. And eventually, Prime Minister Sándor Vekerle withdrew the bill to ratify the agreement exactly 1 year later in March 1909. The debate raged between agrarians, who strongly opposed the agreement, and mercantilists, who certainly supported it. The agrarians' key argument was that Serbia had almost doubled its trade surplus under the previous agreements, exporting goods worth of 1 billion dinars to the monarchy, while the monarchy's exports amounted only 628 million dinars, most of which came from the Austrian side. So, in other words, Hungary didn't have any benefits from these previous trade agreements with Serbia. Although this agreement was not enacted into law, it was clear that normalizing economic relations was necessary. Efforts were made to this end after the crisis subsided, and the initial talks with the Serbian government were exclusively diplomatic until July 1910, when the experts from Hungary's and Austria's ministries of commerce and agriculture also participated in the negotiations, and so did the Serbian experts, of course, which ultimately proved successful. As a result, by 1911, the monarchy accounted for 41% of the Serbian imports, and in the same year, the same amount of goods arrived from Serbia to Habsburg monarchy as well. The further normalization of relations was reflected in ministerial decision in September 1910, which abolished the passport requirement between Hungary and Serbia. Half a year later, March 1911, the monarchy signed several agreements with Serbia, including a consular agreement and treaties on the inheritance, guardianship, document authentication, and civil registries, which were also enacted in law in the same year, in June 1911. However, the Balkan Wars once again set back relations. In December 1912, a bill was submitted to reintroduce the passport requirement. Despite this, the Balkan Wars did not reach the threshold of concern for Hungary's political elite in parliament. A thorough review of parliamentary records reveals that Serbia was hardly mentioned from 1912 onwards. Even in 1913, it was scarcely discussed. This remained the case until the assassination in Sarajevo. This silence underscores how little foreign policy mattered to the political elite seated in the Hungarian parliament. Not so for the imperial and Hungarian governmental elite, who attached great importance to the situation in the Balkans, but it is a subject I will explore in the edited version of my paper. Thank you.